Good afternoon, safety champions, and welcome to the second episode in season 5 of the Aviation Focus Sessions. Aviation brings you affordable and certified continuous professional development to help raise the bar on aviation safety in Africa. And in our focus sessions, we train and entertain for African aviation safety. Every day, thousands of professionals like you work very hard in Africa to make commercial aviation the safest mode of transport, also in Africa. And you do it not for recognition, but because you know your industry and your country depend on it, and because it's the right thing to do. Today we'll be talking about two things. First of all, what will be the biggest force for safety improvements in 2025-26? In the opinion of the guests here at the table, what will be or should be that big force? But we'll also be looking at the growing importance of sustainability in our industry and its relationship with safety. Important to mention that you realize this episode is sponsored by aircraft manufacturer ATR from Toulouse. ATR is the world's #1 aircraft manufacturer for regional aviation. I got that in there. Sales pitch. Or sponsor pitch, I should say. Today at the table I'm joined by an aviator with an engineering background and a good 23 years in aviation, engineering and safety. Eric DeMoney is Director of Safety and Regulatory Affairs for Europe and the Commonwealth of Independent States for aircraft manufacturer Boeing, based in Brussels. Thanks for joining us today, Eric.
Yeah, I'm really happy to be here.
First time in Holland, or you've been here many times before?
Many times.
Many times.
Yes.
Welcome back then, I should say, I guess. My second guest here today started his journey into aviation from Ghana. With a background as an aviation engineer, Kwame Bekoe has worked at aircraft manufacturer Airbus, aircraft leasing giant GCAS, and more recently as a commercial director at synthetic fuel manufacturer Zero. And he's now starting up a new venture called AfriSAF. We'll hear more about that later on. Akwaba with Aviation.
Excellent. Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Likewise. I'm not sure there are many languages, of course, in Ghana. I hope Akwaba is a good one.
There are many, but Akwaba is the most popular.
Okay, yeah.
Welcome.
I remembered from a record from Angelique Kidjo, I think. That's
yes,
why.
yes.
Welcome once again.
Thank you.
And my third guest today has been a regular guest in the focus sessions over the past 5 years. On his LinkedIn profile, he states that he specializes in aviation safety occurrence reporting, safety culture and investigation. In various roles over the past 36 years, Adrian Young currently works as a senior aviation safety data analyst at the Civil Aviation Authority of the Netherlands. Welcome back, Adrian.
Thank you, Tom. Great to be back again.
Familiar territory for you.
Definitely. Looking forward to today's discussion.
Thanks. But before we go into the discussion, I have to tell the viewers about the prize draw that we have to give you a chance to win $100 in cash in each episode. And here's how it works. Throughout the show, I will give you 3 letters. Every 10 minutes or so, we'll show you one of the favorite books of our guests here in the studio. And just write down the first letter of the first name of the author. You combine all those 3 letters to form a 3-letter code and then submit that on the webpage at the bottom of the screen. And you have 15 minutes, 15, after the show to submit. Then from all the correct answers, one lucky winner will receive $100 by mobile money. I will announce the winner on LinkedIn, so that's an extra good reason to follow us on LinkedIn. Right, let's get started. Like I said, today, 2 main topics. First, we'll look at what my guests see as the main force for safety improvements this year and next. And then we'll be talking about sustainability and safety, because it's time we in the safety community learn more about sustainability too. So Eric, let me start with you in terms of what you see as the main opportunity for safety promotion in 2025, 2026.
Thanks for having me. It's exciting to be here for sure. Well, there's such a wide variety of topics that you could touch on. But when we think about some of the fundamentals where, especially when you think about Africa, the opportunity for laying a strong foundation in a part of the world that's growing super rapidly. It's got a great young population. It is It's just a budding aviation system that's really ready to explode. And for that to be a safe system, a quality system, this safety management system fundamentals, I think, are absolutely critical for Africa. And it's going to be critical for 2025, 2026, and beyond. And then that foundation gets laid. SMS has been around for decades, I think, but it all starts, it's got four main parts, but the key aspects, the most important, I think, is around culture. Laying out, establishing just culture, establishing from a leadership on down throughout the whole organization, psychological safety around the work that they're doing, the importance of what they're doing. And if you get that right, everything else kind of flows out of it. Established policy, risk management, assurance, all those sorts of things. So safety management system, culture, that's the fundamental.
And you mentioned psychological safety. I mean, we have a special episode still available on YouTube, actually, on psychological safety. But can you briefly say what that means? Because when I heard it first, I was quite taken aback. What is psychological safety?
There's a book I really like, different from the one we got today, but around how to develop cultures. And one of the key aspects of it is creating this idea of psychological safety. So if somebody is coming in, we're so in tune and wired to be self-preservation and making sure we're not stepping out of line. It's really comfortable to get in that space. And if there's not an environment around the individual, the worker, the ground crew, the pilots, whatever the case may be, where they don't feel comfortable speaking up, or they don't feel comfortable identifying an issue, maybe their schedule pressures or feel more important from their bosses, or getting an airplane out the door. For us at Boeing, if there's not an environment around them that encourages, that rewards stopping and saying, hold on a second, we've got an issue here. That's what we mean by psychological.
So feeling safe in a way to sort of report stuff and to talk about stuff openly.
Yeah, and not be afraid for your job or your livelihood or your family back at home. Yeah,
which is very important. Yeah. Okay, so safety culture is what we take away from you. Adrian, if I can bring it to you, what would be one of the things you think?
I'm going to agree a lot with Eric on this one, but just from a slightly different approach. The potential for African aviation to grow means that within that managed safety, we really have to manage the change. Okay. Change management is fundamental as systems grow. You're going to hire more people, you're going to have more equipment.
Different routes,
but airport infrastructure will be used more heavily. So the management of change throughout the entire network of aviation activities is going to be pressurized, and you have to everyone has to make sure that their role is still able to be safely conducted. Yeah. And I think if we're looking at the other specific themes, let's look back. Last year was not the best year for aviation, but even with a difficult year for fatal accidents on commercial air transports, it's still one accident worldwide per 5 million departures.
Yeah, which is still really
Aviation is so safe that we cannot rely on the accidents alone. Mm-hmm. We need to be getting our incident data, we need to be getting our flight data, our normal monitoring data much more actively into our decision-making systems, because we can't wait for the accidents to happen.
And for that, we need the psychological safety that Eric mentioned. Mm-hmm. People don't feel happy about talking.
Absolutely into that. If you're not going to tell me what's slightly abnormal, then how can a manager then make a decision? We're going to do it on assumptions, and human nature tells us that we'll be slightly more optimistic than is possibly realistic.
Yeah.
So basically change management and working on it explicitly. Well, it looks like a sales pitch, but we also have a previous episode of the Focus Sessions about change management. So I'd love to invite the viewers out there to go to our YouTube channel and watch that, which is www.youtube.com/Aviassist Foundation. So another point, the change management and making sure we are on top of that, managing those changes. Kwame, we'll get to you in a moment about sustainability, but of course you have a background as an aviation engineer, very much into Tier 1 part, I think. So safety is where you started, and I'm sure where you're still very heavily involved in relation to sustainability. What do you think for this year and the next would be an opportunity for us as the African aviation industry to boost that safety?
Very good question. And, in terms of my background, I studied in aircraft engineering, studied in the UK in Cranfield University, learned a lot about safety and, really designing aircraft for ultimate loads and understanding the limit loads and things like this. And this has always been fundamental. So something that was ingrained in me from a very early stage of my career when I started working with Airbus and designing structural parts such as the winglet. And how do you retrofit a wing that has been designed for no winglet to suddenly introduce all these bending moments and forces to improve the efficiency? So, obviously there's a significant amount of safety that comes into play there, because these aircraft, they last for a long time, right? They go on for not just the passenger life, but we're looking at reconfiguring aircraft, both Airbus and Boeing, to last in a second life as a cargo aircraft, as a freighter. So, safety is very critical. I think I'll talk a bit more about the sustainability angle later on. But I think, ultimately speaking, it's the primary driver that is needed in aviation, upon which we will build on everything else. It's just so fundamental.
Yeah, what we say at Aviation very often is people always say safety first, but actually that's not the case. It is service first, safety always, really, because in the end, most of us are not in the industry. Aviation is, but all other actors are in the business to make money in the end, let's be honest. So I think that's... and is there any particular domain you think we could focus ourselves on in the coming year, 2 years, in terms of safety promotion?
Well, particularly in Africa, obviously growing continent in terms of people, there's a lot of development now happening with regards to the aviation infrastructure. And I think Africa has the opportunity to leapfrog many existing technologies to adopt modern ways of, and modern safe ways of basically going about operations and design, rather than, look into what has been done in the past. And I think that's a very exciting opportunity for the continent, that leapfrog effect.
Yeah. Not difficult, not easy to achieve sometimes.
Not easy at all.
Step up. Have you seen any of that in Boeing, Eric, in terms of opportunities to not follow the linear path of development like we in the West have had it, maybe, to give another area a benefit of leapfrogging, basically?
Ooh, that's an interesting question.
It's difficult, isn't it?
Yeah.
I remember I once did a talk about leapfrogging for a ground handling conference. One of our other partners runs a ground handling International Africa conference, and they asked me to speak about leapfrogging, and it's not easy. Sometimes it happens, like with a mobile phone in Africa. Lots of people have never had a landline, a fixed line at home, but to achieve that indeed is a nice challenge for us to set, I think, Adrian.
I think you have to look at it in sort of different directions, different dimensions at the same time, which is not easy. But specifically ground handling and everything Kwame is talking about, I recognize. But when you look at how those things are going to change, typically in many African countries, ground handling jobs are seen as valued jobs. It's good employment. Whereas in Europe, the US, they are, forgive me, they're the jobs you can't get, the jobs you get when you fail the entrance test for fast food chains. Their turnover is very high.
Yeah.
There is a potential for economic development in African countries where that same trend will then come. And then you'll start a higher turnover, less knowledge. Less knowledge means less adherence to operating procedures, potential for more incidents and accidents. So it's not just an engineering issue, it's connected fundamentally to the way the economy and society will develop.
Yeah.
Well, and there's a lot of pressures from a financial standpoint, an economic standpoint, that will try to push that leapfrog change that might be happening. And there's a big difference between if you're flying a 737 Classic for years and years and years, and all of a sudden you get a 787. And we've seen pretty stark examples where the operator of the airline, they're just not ready. And so leapfrogging is exciting, but if you don't have that foundation to be able to account for the change that's being created by this leapfrog innovation, it can have some consequences.
It's the same for airports too.
Yeah.
If 80% of your traffic as being code C, so 737, A320 size aircraft. And then suddenly we've got wide bodies, more and more wide bodies coming from more and more different countries. Is the airport infrastructure able to cope with that? Is the airport operations staff able to handle? These are fundamental issues to managing that growth, which of course the benefits we wish on the inhabitants, the population of all of these countries. But you can go backwards if you're not careful in terms of safety.
Okay, so something to keep monitoring. Yes, go ahead.
I was just going to add that I think now with we talk a lot about AI and big data and a lot of the influence of this in the space of places like safety, and I'm quite encouraged by a lot of the innovation I see in platforms that are developed to optimize operations, ground operations, or even observe or pick up on areas where there could be concern. Using readily available tools, sometimes using basic cameras and mobile phones and things like that, that could potentially add or increase or improve the safety. And I guess the accessibility of these tools could make it easier to increase the awareness of safety and use safety.
And I think also, you mentioned the apps, the opportunities are there from an IT perspective, AI. What's very promising in Africa, of course, and Ghana is a good example, but so is Kenya, for example. The number of youngsters there that are into programming, not just in their mom's kitchen, but who work serious programming. So that I think might have lots of opportunities for Africa to do things which will reduce the cost of operating, but also increase safety opportunities with the cameras you were talking about, or the apps indeed, It's time for our first book, gentlemen, because the people out there want to have a chance to win this $100. So the first book is by an author called Neil Munro, and it's titled Para Handy Tales. Neil Munro. The only thing that's important for you out there is the first letter of the first name of the author, which is the November. I think, Adrian, this is your...
I bought that one.
So briefly tell us, why did you take
it's about as far away from aviation as we can get.
Okay.
It's a collection of stories relating to a man, the captain of a small boat in the Western Isles of Scotland around the beginning of the 20th century. And it's written with great love for the people and that area. And reflects probably something that is now more history than 120 years later, but gives a very, very good picture of what the Western Isles were once like from the perspective of this slightly roguish boat captain.
So basically also a holiday destination you would recommend to the viewers out there if they ever get...
With some excellent small regional airports and little airplanes to go flying on. So yes, absolutely.
That's great to hear. And are they also using sustainable fuels there, you think, increasingly? Those regional airports, that's a nice bridge to...
A nice bridge. Sustainable aviation SAF in the UK is coming.
Okay.
But the smaller airports are taking a while for the delivery lines to get there. You look at operations like Loganair in Scotland are looking at SAF, are looking at electric aviation, are looking at hydrogen aviation. So yes, Scotland's probably a good place to go and talk about sustainable fuel as well.
And regional aviation, which is a good platform because it's a shorter route.
Yeah.
I first also want to address the audience out there, because we also offer a chance for you to qualify for a certificate of attendance of this session. For that, you have to sit an exam, which you can read all about on our website, and you'll receive an email about those opportunities as well. We take a short commercial break for a message from one of our sponsors. Right, now time to move to something completely different. Or is it, Kwame? Sustainable aviation. It's very important, I think, that the aviation community and the safety community, both here but also the people out there, get a much better understanding of sustainability and the relation between sustainability and safety. We'll get there in a moment also with Eric and Adrian in terms of that connection indeed. But this is a domain you're heavily involved in. One of the options for sustainability is the increasing use or the use of sustainable aviation fuels. Please tell us a bit, what are they about, Kwame, those sustainable aviation fuels?
Yeah, sure. I mean, just in a nutshell, obviously we know that aircraft are powered using Jet A1 fuel, and this is all fossil-derived fuel. So at the moment we're extracting fossil fuels from the earth, we are burning them, combusting them, and releasing CO2 into the atmosphere, which leads to global warming, and we know about all of that. So essentially what sustainable aviation fuels are is they essentially take CO2 that is already in the atmosphere, either through bio feedstock, which basically converts that CO2 into an energy source, or through the power to liquid or e-fuels or electrofuels. It's known as many things. It's the same thing essentially. But what that does is it absorbs CO2 using the direct air carbon capture, combines that with hydrogen, and essentially creates a replica of jet fuel, essentially. So it's a drop-in fuel. It can be used in existing aircraft and engines.
Okay.
The only difference with SAF is that it doesn't come from a fossil-based fuel, which is basically coming from the ground, from already sequestrated carbon, which is under the earth.
Now, the difficult thing, of course, is I find myself at the table with 3 engineers, more or less, and I'm a lawyer, so run me by this biofeed thing. What is biofeed-based fuel?
Bio-based fuel is essentially fuel that is produced from a biological source. So anything that comes from an organic source, it could be used cooking oil, which is very popular now. It's the cheapest form of SAF.
Okay.
It could be waste agricultural residue, or through the alcohol routes using either sugarcane or any of these crops like that to produce ethanol, and then you convert that into SAF. Or, as I mentioned to you, power to liquid, which uses green hydrogen. Green hydrogen essentially electrolyzing water to divide that into its constituent parts, hydrogen and oxygen. And you take the hydrogen, it's green because it's basically produced with renewable energy.
Like solar energy, for
like
example?
solar, wind, hydro, geothermal. And then you combine that with a CO2 source or CO source, which is either through a biogenic source of CO2 or direct air carbon capture, which is a lot less mature than we need it to be. It's going to take time for that pathway to mature. So at the moment, it's mainly going to be using biogenic CO2.
Okay, and I mean, a lot of the things you mentioned make me think of Africa in terms of resources you need for that, right?
Absolutely.
Biofeed.
Yeah, and I think that for me is what I'm going to be going on to into the future, because Africa has a significant amount of biofeedstock. A bit about my background, I've been involved in agriculture for many decades now. My family's involved in agriculture.
Okay.
And unfortunately, what tends to happen in Africa with the residue is that it's just burnt off. Mm. And when it's burnt, it releases a lot more harmful toxins in the atmosphere, NOx emissions, sulfurs, and carbon monoxide, which is a lot more damaging to the environment. What many people don't realize is that there's still a lot of value in these products.
Offal, so to say, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. So that could actually be converted into a biogas, into a biomethane, and eventually into a SAF. So this is what we're looking to realize in terms of value potential.
Okay. And Eric, do you see, because obviously for commercial aviation, the type of aircraft that you produce is Boeing, you need large quantities of that kind of fuel.
Large.
You sometimes hear in the news that, well, that will not be SAF, at least not in the short term. What's Boeing's take on that in terms of sustainable fuels and taking the sustainability to the next level, basically?
Yeah. Well, we're really excited about sustainable aviation fuels. I think that's fun. When Boeing has a model that anybody can take a look at called the Cascade model that lays out the different avenues to get to net zero carbon emissions. And sustainable aviation fuel is the biggest lever by far. What we really like about it is the ability for it to drop into existing infrastructure at the airports, in our aircraft. And
when you say drop in, because some of our viewers are not, that conversant with English is not their first language. What do you mean, like drop in? What does that mean?
Yeah. Good. Thank you. So essentially, it's the ability to, today we use the jet fuel that Kwame mentioned earlier. That fuel goes through our aircrafts in our systems and it burns through the engine. With pretty minor modifications, there's still work to do to verify, ensure that it's reliable and safe. But by and large, it's pretty minor modifications to the aircraft to be able to utilize SAF. So it's drop in. It's just
so theoretically, you could take out the old-fashioned fuel, if you like, and drop in basically the eSAF or the SAF.
Yeah, exactly. And this is even more critical for Africa because, unfortunately, this is a region where the average age of aircraft is slightly elder than the world average.
Yes.
So many of these aircraft are going to be operating for decades to come. So we can't just replace all of these assets overnight. We still need a solution to power them in a sustainable world.
With the engines that are there now,
with the engines, with the aircraft,
anyway.
with the infrastructure, with everything still in place, correct.
Yeah. There's a lot of economic security that comes to Africa with sustainable aviation fuels as well.
Economic security?
Yeah, so you're not relying on other oil-producing countries, the U.S., Saudi, or whatnot, but being able to have an energy source homegrown there in Africa, the sustainable aviation fuels are, I think, a great lever for that.
Sounds like music to your ears, Kwame.
It is. I mean, energy independence is everything because not only that, it creates jobs, it creates opportunities. And one of the things I think about is sustainability is key, both environmentally, but also socially and financial as well, because Africa is one of the fastest growing regions. I think by 2050, almost 1 in 4 of the world will be African. And so you've got to think about how do you sort of think about employment and social well-being, and ensure that, you're able to develop the opportunities, the plants, and, just the ability to continue operations. Some airports in Africa, the cost of fuel is almost 4 times, if not more, the cost in other regions.
Partially because it has to come from far, right?
Correct, yes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, even if you can produce a local SAF, which may still be 2 or 3 times more expensive, you may actually be able to get it cheaper than what they're having today, which is a unique opportunity.
And of course, on top of that, you mentioned it, the job opportunities it gives, because there's of course a whole group of very young Africans who are keen to get a job. So this may be one of the opportunities. And I think, like Adrian said, maybe to some extent, aviation can become a more attractive employer again as well, in many ways, even for us in the West, because if it's more sustainable, then it feels like a nicer place to work, I think, isn't it? Adrian, taking it to safety briefly, there are, of course, Eric mentioned it brief, you need to make some modifications sometimes to fuel or to the engines and other components. What's your take on the balance between safety and sustainability? Do they bite each other? Can they live next to each other?
It depends really on what fuel you're talking about, in my view. The sort of thing for the current technology of SAF, a biofuel, is essentially plug and play. We know the limits of how it works, what you have to do. There are more issues around other fuels like electric and hydrogen. But on the other hand, I mean, hydrogen being used as a vehicle fuel goes back over 40 years. At least in
so it's not a new
parts of Europe. Council vehicles, the rubbish truck, has been hydrogen fueled since the 70s, the 80s. One of the things we as aviation have to do, I think, and this is a bit of sort of swallowing our pride, we pride ourselves on knowing everything because we're aviation, we're top of the pyramid, but we have not. We need to be reaching out to these other industries to better understand or to learn from them so we don't make the mistakes ourselves. Partly related to safety, it's also standardization. Just very briefly, I recently rented an electric battery car. And in the boot of the car, there were 3 different charging cables. Because in Western Europe, there are 3 different sorts of plugs. We can't, how are airports going to have 3 different sorts of plugs? A spot for hydrogen, a spot for normal fuel, and a spot for SAF. We need 5 airports. So we've got some work on standardization and harmonization, I think, before you can make international air transport attractive for some of these fuels. But yeah, hydrogen has some specific safety challenges, which have been in general worked through. Electric vehicles, the same. The quality of the battery is everything.
Those are things we have to pay attention to.
There are things we have to pay attention to, and if we look carefully, we know where to go and find the answers for these things.
But partially, like you say, it may be sort of almost in line with psychological safety, where you mentioned we have to swallow our pride and don't say, well, people that run garbage trucks have no clue about hydrogen. You know, they may be 40 years ahead of us. Indeed.
Absolutely, definitely.
Actually, we may have to change our mindset.
Very good.
I didn't know this one was coming, but for the people out there in Africa, the second letter you'll need is the C, the Charlie from Carol. Carol Dweck, Mindset, New Psychology of Success. I'm trying to think who took this to this video.
That was me.
Kwame, briefly, what made you take this book?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of years during the pandemic, I did my MBA, Columbia University, Ivy League. I thought I was going to learn all of this amazing stuff, which I did in finance, in economics, in business. But I think the biggest takeaway for me is really just how to have that mindset, that positive mindset. And Carol Dweck made a fantastic example of the two different types, which is like a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. And it goes beyond just having an optimistic point of view. It's really just about position yourself to think bigger, to not just expect or the normal, and really just to have a different approach in terms of how you address challenges, and how you move on from that, and how you learn. And that for me was a big takeaway, having been working in aviation for this space for like 20 years, being in an environment where there's people from all sorts of different sectors, and really just sort of unlearning and being able to relearn new traits. So that for me was one of the biggest takeaways for me.
That book. Okay, well, sounds like an interesting one there, gentlemen. Well, it's time first for another short break from our discussions here at the table. If you're new to Aviassist, here's a short video explaining what we do since 1995.
Africa, a continent on the rise. Africa is the world's second biggest air transport growth market, and there is a lot to do. Africa is in the process of giving the continental aviation industry a place on the world map on all fronts. This requires unprecedented efforts, even more so in a post-COVID-19 recovery. It means eliminating a backlog, but also respecting sustainability and CO2 emissions, building safety on the ground and in the air with technical and operational training. More than ever, international cooperation is vital to give what is arguably the most important economic link between Africa and the rest of the world, connecting people across the vast distances in Africa. An essential link, and that's why there is Aviassist. Africa and Aviassist. We have been leading, building and supporting safety promotion for the African aviation industry since 1995. Affordable, independent and professional. We stand up for aviation safety in Africa. We change attitudes and produce safety. Our professionals support African professionals, and we do it with passion by delivering on-site and online courses across Africa and more. Aviassist. Join us in Kigali or anywhere else on the continent. The African aviation industry needs you right now, more than ever. Aviassist.
Okay, well, that gives you an idea of where we have been. We may not have been in business as long as the garbage trucks that Adrian mentioned, but we're celebrating the 30th anniversary this year, which is a really nice achievement. And it's based on the work of, a whole small army of professional volunteers, of which you're now also one. Maybe you didn't realize it when you joined me here at the table, but that's what fuels. Sorry for the pun, but that's what fuels Aviassist. We're driven by volunteers who are keen to engage with other coaches, with other professionals, really. Just before the video, we got to speak about this importance of standardization. So that makes me think of your role, Eric, close to monitoring regulations, primarily in your case on safety and the European side of things. But a lot of those things I would imagine would also translate to Africa. What do you think should be the role of regulators to facilitate the fantastic opportunities that Kwame mentioned and is working on?
Yeah. Well, one of the fundamentals I think is critical for regulators is aside. Laying of fundamentals for safety is critical, but one of the tangential benefits that regulators bring is the level playing field. There's not a loose system over here and a more rigorous system over here, where those operators will have a higher cost associated with the more rigor. The more we get the standard approaches, be it for safety management systems, management of change, operations, whatever the case may be. It's important for regulators to help establish that level playing field. And for sustainable aviation fuel, that's even more critical. Because,
why?
Well, even more critical than safety seems a little silly. But fundamentally, if an airline can get fuel cheaper somewhere else, that's where they're going to go get the fuel. Their per seat costs and the profit margins on that are extremely tight. And so, if they need to, they're forced to pay a little extra for fuel here, but not here, you start to get some concerns and issues relative to competitiveness over one airline over another, or one operating environment over another. And we're a global business. Our airplanes are flying, Airbus airplanes are flying all over the world. And so creating that level playing field is a really important enabler, I think, to making sustainable aviation fuel and those sorts of enhancements and efficiency gains a reality.
Kwame, you've been involved in this domain for quite some time. We first met, I think, in Namibia, indeed.
Yeah.
What do you see in Africa in terms of the regulators? Have you seen best practices where you think, gosh, if other countries would adopt this, it would help us?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. And, almost like as an entrepreneur in the space of aviation, one of the things I've learned and realized is, unlike, sort of like tech ventures where they talk about disruption and complete shifts, this doesn't happen in aviation. Aviation is a very slow-moving tank, and and it's important, of course, primarily because of safety.
Yeah.
And I think that's why we haven't really seen the adoption of things like eVTOL as fast as they could have been, and hydrogen, sort of powered aircraft as well. And we've seen the announcements from Airbus where they've sort of pushed back timing on that. We know that it will come eventually, but it really takes a whole ecosystem, sort of working together to actually move step by step, and understanding how we can work with regulators, with OEMs, with airlines, with operators. And I think we've seen that in many different regards, such as like, aircraft have moved from being all metallic to more composite now. Mm-hmm. And I think in Africa, we've had to learn about how, that changes with regards to mindset and maintenance and things like that. So I think really just bringing on board the regulators and all the different stakeholders is something that will help to move and evolve this sector.
And that, of course, starts with understanding what it is all about, which is partially what this focus session is about. We also hope to do a complete focus session purely on sustainability to better understand. But one of the books you brought, which is not part of the prize draw, actually, I have to say, but I think this is a very good introduction to the topics you're mentioning, isn't it?
It is. It's a fantastic introduction, and I think Dirk and Shashank have done a great job with that book. I mean, just really showcasing some of the great innovators in the space of sustainability who are doing a great job today. I believe they have another book coming out. But I think for people like myself who are looking to be sort of enablers in this space of sustainability, and in my case, drive it forward in the space of Africa. It's a book that really just brings a lot of encouragement as to how to navigate the, the regulators. I think the good thing is we've been talking about this topic for several years, if not decades now. 2021, ICAO, IATA, many of the airlines have come on board, but now it's the time to start work and, seeing some tangible goals.
Yeah, and I think also coming back to this understanding, because I read this book as well by chance, well, not by chance, actually, really to prepare for today, and I found the same. It's a very accessible book. I think we need a lot of that, because I remember when we were both in Namibia, actually, I went to see Walvis Bay Airport, and they spoke to me about, the opportunities to produce this eSAF there with solar energy, but they said this will bring a lot of hydrogen to the area of the airport for which we also need to train in terms of airport firefighting, for example. So there's a whole range. You alluded to it briefly.
Hydrogen burns differently to Jet A1.
It does. It makes them laugh. It burns really explosively, or what is it?
It burns rather quickly.
Okay.
Let's keep it on. Let's not frighten our viewers. But there's also the other thing. In various of the designs that are out there, hydrogen fuel tanks will not be in the wings. So as a firefighter, you need to be told what aircraft's in front of you, because what are you aiming at? If I could move it just ever so slightly away from aeroplane fuel, aircraft fuel, to you mentioned Walvis Bay Airport. It's a small percentage of the CO2 output, but airports use a lot of energy. There are a lot of airports out there that are taking advantage of wind energy and solar power. And solar power also on the airfield. If placed correctly with the right safety assessments, you can very safely 100% power your airport. If I'm not mistaken, the first airport in the world to be 100% solar powered was Kochi in the west of India. So they were creating enough fuel, enough energy, and storing it for the night operations to be 100% solar powered. And in fact, they then went and doubled their production, and they're now powering the city, helping power the city.
They're making money with.
Wind energy is more challenging because large wind turbines. If you look at the stuff that's going up here in Europe in the North Sea, the maximum tip height is over 1,000 foot, 300 meters. They're big things.
You don't want that very close to an airport.
There are issues of turbulence, there are issues of obstacles, none of which are insurmountable, but the ground operations of aviation should be aiming for zero emission. And there are plenty of, as I said, Kochi, I think I'm right. If someone else was first, I'm sorry. But airports should be all aiming for zero emission.
Before I come to hear a bit more about your ventures, Kwame, the third book of today, which is Brief, Make a Bigger Impact by Saying Less, by Joseph McCormack. So the interesting or the important thing for you out there is the Juliet, which would make up the third letter of your three-letter code. Eric, for you?
That is my book.
Briefly tell us why this book.
I'll try to be brief. So I'm an engineer, and engineers...
That's okay.
Yeah, I know. It's okay. Engineers, we can be quite verbose sometimes. I've been in some meetings where engineers are drawn on, and it's hard. And I've done it myself. In engineers, we have all these details kind of bouncing around in our heads, and we want to just spit them out. And it's hard for us to kind of decompose those and get to a more succinct point. It's a very helpful book to give some tangible, really just easy, tactical things that you can do to help you to communicate briefly and quickly. In aviation, speaking like operations, it's really critical to be very succinct and to the point. That's why terminology is so important there. But more broadly, be it sustainable aviation fuel or laying out why SMS is so important, the way we communicate and the way the economy of our words that we can use to be able to drive home a point. If you can be more succinct about it, the takeaway is going to be helps a lot, as opposed to droning on.
And actually, we've seen it as Aviassist as well. Over the past 3 decades, we've also been working on, for example, cartoons in the local language to explain stuff. Because you say engineers are bad at it. I'm a lawyer. They're even worse at it. But I mean, in general, I think it's a mistake we make in aviation safety. We often forget that if we want to, like in case of your work, Kwame, if you want to convince a minister of finance, to open up to renewable energy, to production of eSAFs, if we throw an ICAO book at them, they fall asleep because that's not their comfort zone. So we have to indeed, as a safety society, whether you're an engineer or a lawyer, it doesn't really matter, learn to make it make it tangible and understandable for people who don't have that much time for it either. That's a very important role I think we all have to play in that respect. And I think that's probably also applies, or certainly also applies, to making sustainability more understandable for the average professional. Like I said before, what does this fireman at Walvis Bay Airport has to know about hydrogen? In the case of Walvis Bay is not so much about fueling aircraft, but it's more about the production of this sustainable aviation fuels through the use of solar energy. Briefly, Kwame, tell us about, you've come from an industry, power to liquid, which is looking at all kinds of different domains, so Formula One, aircraft, etc. Now you're entering a new venture. Tell us briefly about it.
Yeah, sure. So AfriSAF really is looking to unlock the natural resources of Africa to drive forward this energy transition. And as I sort of mentioned before, I've been in agriculture now for several decades, and I always had this love of aviation and agriculture, but never saw how the two of them. And I think, it's only been like the past 3-4 years that I've been like, wow, there's actually so many synergies between the two. So my farm in Ghana, actually, just 3 years ago, we were developing a new plot, just a very brief story. We're doing, different types of products. We're doing fish, we're doing cattle, we've got goats, and we've got chicken as well. And essentially, what the team said is we can actually make this a circular, completely circular. So essentially, all of the waste from the agriculture on that side goes now into a biodigester. And that biodigester produces biogas, which we clean to biomethane. And that powers all the farm vehicles, everything. And that sort of sat down and made me think. So, we've got this complete circular system whereby we're growing all the food we need. We have all the power and the energy we need. We have solar panels there. We're completely off-grid. There's no energy coming out. It's just completely neutral. And it's not only environmentally sustainable, but it's commercially sustainable as well.
That's what we have to achieve with aviation as well, of course. It has to be, like Eric said, it has to be financially viable as well, isn't it?
Exactly. So that's the story. It's about how can we move a whole sector. Of course, it's going to take time to be sustainable environmentally, but also financially. That's very critical. And I think that's the story and the message that we're trying to bring, that there are avenues to make that possible.
And with AfriSAF, you specifically focus on the aviation side of things.
So we are focusing on the aviation. Obviously, there are other types of transportation that can benefit from bioenergy. But aviation is key. It's where we see the mandates. It's where we see the airlines and the interest and the government and regulators. And obviously, it's a hard-to-abate sector. So while shipping can look at so many different types of fuel, methanol and, ammonia, hydrogen, aviation, it really is SAF. We've got 30,000 aircraft in operation today. We need to power all these for the next 30, 40, 50 years.
Okay, excellent. Well, I look forward to hearing more from that story when we have that next focus session about sustainability purely. I'm afraid, lovely panel members, we're almost coming to the end of today. One last thing you want to add in terms of where you think we should go with safety and sustainability?
There's a vision coming into my head of chickens and goats grazing at Amsterdam airport on the basis that we're producing fuel with it. And I think we need some fencing, but apart from that, I'm on board.
And I think what it does is, I think it brings home the point that you made earlier, Adrian, that we have to have this mindset of this book of, yes, of course, Kwame, everybody knows that farm will not produce enough stuff for aviation, but it's the concept, I think you're saying, about coming to this circular approach and to this closed environment almost, where you have all the benefits coming together and actually basically left with very few negatives if you do it correctly. Eric?
I was struck by the creativity that I heard from that example. And I think that's what we need. We need that creativity, that curiosity to look at problems differently in this space. Otherwise, we're not going to make a dent. We've got you talked about hydrogen. We think we've got a generation in front of us to get that to work in aviation. But is there creative ways, and approaches that we can look at to do it? That's key. Fostering that creativity is going to be so important.
And actually, that's very interesting because in the our Safety Focus magazine, we also publish a magazine. If you send us your PO box, we happily subscribe you to it for free, courtesy of our sponsors. But I speak about in one of the articles as well about the importance to increase training on creativity in aviation. Because very often that's lacking. So what you sometimes find yourself doing in the courses of Aviation is drawing and making things which initially feels like we're trying to kill time, but it's about actually, encouraging people to be creative and think outside of, what they're used to think, outside their comfort zone. Kwame, in closing, any?
Yeah, I mean, so at the moment there's about 33 SAF plants in the world at commercial scale.
Okay.
There are plans for 130 between now and 2030. We need 300 to be on the trajectory for net zero by 2050. Only one plant in Africa at the moment. Only one plant. Only one.
Where is it based?
South Africa.
South Africa, okay.
So, I mean, clearly there's a big disconnect as to where the resource is, where the potential is. And, you know, based on initial calculations we've done, based on the availability of the feedstock and the cost of labor, we have the potential in the continent to make SAF at cost parity with fossil fuel.
With current
and very scalable. I mean, Africa has 60% of the world's uncultivated arable land that is just not doing anything. And about 70% of the population of Africa are into smallholder farming. So if we empower these people to not only farm the food that they need, but also farm potentially energy crops and aggregate what they're doing, have a recycling system similar to what we have in Europe, that can really be transformative. And that's what we're sort of working on.
Excellent. Well, we look forward to working with you on that, Kwame and the rest of the team. I'm afraid this is all we have time for today. Thank you very much for making your way here from your respective duty stations. And then to your lovely viewers out there, thank you for tuning in for safety, from Juba to Gaborone, from Rwanda to Namibia. If you enjoyed today's focus session, please be our ambassador and tell your friends about the work of Aviassist and about the focus sessions. Come and visit us at our first Aviassist Safety Promotion Center, the Aviassist Safety Promotion Center Rwanda, based in Kigali. Lots of exciting courses coming up there in 2025. In September, we're running a continuous airworthiness maintenance management course, which would make the hearts of the engineers here beat faster, I'm sure. We also have several courses coming on in West Africa, which would probably please Kwame as well, because so far we've mostly been active in East and Southern Africa. But we're working with the Landover Aviation Business School in Lagos to teach about safety management systems and international air law. Then a whole host of courses throughout the year, from Kenya to Zambia to Namibia. Including in November an obstacle limitations course, which is very important in view of any windmills you want to put up to power this renewable drive. And then later on in the year we'll land in Johannesburg in cooperation with the Airlines Association of Southern Africa to teach an incident investigation course. And as we always say at Aviassist, only you can target safety. We look forward to continue our mission with you to improve African aviation safety. Join us for the next focus session on the 27th of August, when we'll be talking about safety and ground operations. Same time, same frequency. For now, we say Tiza Onana to our Nyanja speakers, and see you next time to the rest of you.